All right, welcome back from break. I'm back, and I'd like to introduce for this next presentation my colleague from the Educator Excellence and Equity Division, Joy Kessel. Joy, I know we don't often get the opportunity to hear from your division at the North-South meeting, so would you mind saying just a few words about your division's role in the department?
Absolutely. So happy to be here with you all today. So our division, the Educator Equity and Excellence Division, supports teachers, principals, and other school leaders through professional learning programs, including Title II and standards implementation, as well as through the promotion of the state's quality professional learning standards. And those standards provide schools and districts with guidelines for high-quality professional learning systems. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Joy. And Joy actually is one of the original members of the Digital Library State Leadership Team. So she was very much involved in the initial rollout of the Digital Library in California and bringing on board and training our very first group of California educators who are part of the state network of educators. So we're really happy to have Joy here today to co-present. And Joy and I are happy to be here to talk with you about leveraging the full suite of smarter, balanced components. If you can believe it, it has been almost 5 years. We're entering our 5th school year of having the Smarter Balanced interim assessments and digital library available to California educators. And at CDE, we love to hear about the different ways in which the interim assessments and the digital library are being used in classrooms. We often hear about ways in which teachers are using either the interim assessments or the digital library, but it's less common for us to hear about instances in which teachers are using both of those system components, along with results from the Smarter Balanced summative assessments, to plan and implement classroom instruction. So the primary purpose of today's presentation is to provide some ideas for how to use the various components from within the system and hopefully spark some interest in going back home to your school sites and promoting use of the full suite, because the intent of Smarter Balance really is that all three of those components be used together to support teaching and learning. So over the next 25 minutes or so, we'll be taking you through a quick overview of the Smarter Balance system, and we'll talk about how leveraging all the components of the system can help support teaching and learning. We'll be taking you through a sample scenario of how a teacher might implement and incorporate the various components within classroom instruction. And we'll show you a video featuring one California district's experience using the Smarter Balanced system. So let's start with a quick overview of the Smarter Balanced system. So Smarter Balance really was built on the principle that teaching and learning can be maximized through the use of various measures of student learning throughout the school year. So it consists not only of those end-of-year summative assessments, but also interim assessments, and then through the digital library, formative assessment practices and tools. And those two components are available year-round, and there's a lot of flexibility in how teachers can use them. We've got the digital library. It has thousands of instructional resources to support teachers in implementing formative assessment practices, and a lot of professional learning resources. We've got the interim assessments that contain items that are built to the same specifications as our summative assessments. And the great thing is that all three components, the summative assessments, the interim assessments, and the digital library, essentially are built by teachers in Smarter Balanced member states. And everything is aligned with the Common Core state standards. This graphic shows a more accurate representation of the approximate proportion of time that classroom teachers are spending in each area of the assessment system. And it doesn't even have to be Smarter Balanced. A comprehensive system of assessment, it consists of assessments of learning, of summative assessments, and assessments for learning, formative assessments. So whether a teacher is implementing the Smarter Balance system or another comprehensive system of assessments, this graphic shows really a more realistic picture of the amount of time being spent in each of those components. The summative assessments typically are the most highly visible component of the system. Maybe not surprising because of the public-facing nature of their results, but it's really the other two components of the system, the interim assessments, and particularly the formative assessments, where teachers are spending most of their time in the classroom. And fortunately, with Smarter Balance, there is a lot of flexibility in how teachers can use those two components. Now, we know that teachers are already using formative assessment practices in their classrooms, and many are already using interim assessments. If you take a look at this slide, you can see there are a lot of options to choose from within the Smarter Balance system, particularly the interim assessments and the digital library. For the interim assessments, you have the viewing system that can be used to preview interim assessment items before even administering them. You have two types of interim assessments to choose from, the blocks and the comprehensives. If you administer an interim assessment that requires local hand scoring, you're interacting with the hand scoring system. And then you've got the reporting system, which has a bunch of different features to provide educators with various pieces of information and data to inform their next steps in instruction. And in the digital library, you've got all sorts of playlists to choose from, all sorts of instructional resources and professional learning resources. And absolutely, it can be really appealing to have a lot of options to choose from, but absent some guidance and some real purposeful planning, it can quickly feel overwhelming to have to feel like you have to make selections from these options without that information. So, for the purposes of today's presentation, I think there are two really key points. First, yes, there are absolutely a lot of options, but there's no reason you can't keep it simple and select just one or two options, at least for starters. And second, even though there's a lot of flexibility in how those resources are used, for example, the digital library resources can absolutely be modified by teachers to best meet the needs of their students. Even though there's a lot of flexibility, again, there's nothing wrong with keeping it simple. So you'll see in the sample scenario that we're going to walk you through, we are focusing primarily on the two options that appear in the bold red font on this slide, an interim assessment block and its corresponding playlist. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joy, who's going to take us through a sample scenario of how a teacher might incorporate various system components within classroom planning and implementation.
Thank you, Jessica. All right. And so, as Jessica mentioned, this sample scenario is really to demonstrate how the Smarter Balance components can fit into what teachers are already doing in curriculum and instruction planning. And so keep in mind, this is just a sample, just to help visualize how the components might be used to support teaching and learning throughout the year. And so this scenario that we're going to go through is going to illustrate this continuous feedback loop between instruction, curriculum, and assessment. We're going to follow a teacher as she adapts her curriculum to support instruction, drawing from evidence from a variety of assessments to determine the next steps in instruction. And this cycle, of course, closely follows the formative assessment process. And so I hope many of you are familiar with the formative assessment attributes on this slide: clarifying intended learning, eliciting evidence of that learning, interpreting the evidence and then acting on it. Those steps each inform that continuous feedback loop between curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And in this scenario, we're also going to take a look at student involvement, right? Because we know that motivation and engagement plays a key role in instruction through teacher feedback, through peer feedback, and self-assessment. And so in this scenario, we're going to follow a sixth grade teacher. In this first step, setting goals and planning, she is planning a unit of instruction for her students. And She begins first by establishing the learning goals for this unit, right? Determining how to provide instruction that's going to help her students meet those learning goals. And so during an instructional planning meeting with her colleagues, look at how happy they are. They love collaborative meeting time, don't we all, right? They are analyzing data from a variety of sources, right? They're looking at benchmark assessments from last year, grades, but they're also able to look at summative assessment results from the previous year. And she's going to look at two sets of data. She's going to look at the data from her students that were in her class last year, so she can reflect on the curriculum and instruction that she had in place last year. But she's also going to look at the assessment results for her incoming students, so she can evaluate any of the learning needs that those students may need in the next year. And so from this analysis, she finds that she sees that a lot of students are grappling with this change from reading literature to analyzing informational text. And so she's got this focus area now. And now she can think about what she might do to support her students, how she might supplement, adapt her curriculum and instruction to provide that support to her students. And she exchanges ideas with her very enthusiastic colleagues. And this helps because they are all working in the same context. One of the resources that's available to teachers as they plan is, of course, the Connections playlist that Jessica mentioned in the previous presentation. Our teacher reviews that skill set on the left side of that document from the grade 6 Read Informational Text Connections playlist. And this helps her on setting meaningful, measurable goals for this unit of study. The Connection playlist also helps her identify curriculum and instructional approaches that are going to help her students meet the learning goals, including digital library resources that can be adapted to meet the specific needs of her students. And during her planning, she may even use the interim assessment viewing system so that she can preview the items on the grade 6 read informational text interim assessment block. And really, that's what the interim assessment viewing system is meant for, to help teachers preview the types of questions and the scope of content on the IAB and ICAs. And so access to the system can really help teachers. It helps our teacher to gauge when to administer a specific interim assessment block. And so giving teachers the time, the resources, and the data to do this kind of work, to focus on content and pedagogy in collaboration with their peers, is really a good example of high-quality professional learning. And so in step 2, our teacher is engaging in the day-to-day process of instruction with the informational texts. And the instructional approaches that she's using are based on a thoughtful, intentional formative assessment process that she's developed based on her unique understanding of her students. She clarifies the intended learning with her students with help from the playlist. She's using digital library resources to supplement the content and the formative assessment practices she's using for best first instruction. These resources already have the formative assessment attributes built into them. And so it provides our teacher with ideas for clarifying the intended learning and also eliciting evidence of that learning. The resources, she's also incorporating the interim assessment block items that she identified through the viewing system. In her first instruction, she has students pair up to complete items from an interim assessment block. And this is going to help her figure out early on in the unit where students are understanding the concepts and where they might need some additional support. And also, by having students work on these items in pairs, they're also engaged in the formative assessment process. They're learning and seeing what the intended learning is, and they're also evaluating evidence of that learning with each other. And so you can see how strategic use of the playlist and the IAB provides our teacher with actionable feedback on her first instruction that she can use to adjust instruction as she goes along with this unit. So in step 3, our teacher is checking on progress. She's checking on progress throughout the unit of instruction, right, using multiple measures. She administers an interim assessment block in a non-standardized manner. And she knows, we all know, that no single measure is going to be a sole indicator of her students' ability.
And so she considers student results on the IAB alongside other items of other evidence of student performance, including classroom quizzes, embedded tasks within the unit, group portfolios, student self-assessments, and so on. She knows that together, all of these items, all of these pieces of evidence provide a clear picture of where her students are in their learning progression. She knows that together, these measures provide information that she can use to adjust. She may consider how are students performing across all of these pieces of evidence. Are there areas of concern, trends, students who need additional support? Maybe there are misconceptions about the learning goals. She considers maybe are other teachers seeing the same results that she's seeing? What can she do with new assessment information to inform the formative assessment process? And so our teacher's been intentional with her first instruction so that it can provide her with rich sources of evidence that she can use that can be easily interpreted to think about the next steps. And so digging a little deeper into these resources, one of the pieces that she can use, one of the pieces available to teachers is, of course, the interim assessment reporting system. And the results of an IAB are available to a teacher in minutes, right? I mean, depending on the IAB that they're using. And so shortly after they've administered an IAB, they can log into the system and start unpacking the results. And so in our scenario, our teacher can see the student score distribution, and she can see that most of her students, 53%, are scoring at near standard. And so digging a little deeper, the key distractor analysis in the interim assessment reporting system provides item-level performance information that can be used to guide next steps. The teacher is able to review each response from all of the students, and that could be used for a variety of purposes. For example, a teacher could collect exemplar responses to this particular item and have students do a classroom activity where they're actually identifying how a response may or may not exemplify the learning goals. So she's continuing on her process. In step 4, she's looking to adjust instruction. And really, for teachers to be able to maximize the effectiveness of the formative assessment process, they are doing ongoing engagement with the process to gauge, measure, respond, and support learning, while also informing their own professional practice, their own professional planning and evaluation goals. How is she continuously improving her craft? And so based on the evidence from multiple sources, including the IAB, she knows that most of her students are at or near the standard for reading informational text midway through this unit. What else can she do to support her students? She has direct access to resources within the results of the IAB that she's just administered. And so she selects the instructional resources button in the interim assessment viewing system. And so just get a visual on this. Once she selects that button, it takes her straight into the digital library. And so she revisits that connections playlist that she used in step 1 to identify more resources within the grade 6 read informational text playlist to think about next steps in the formative assessment practices that she's using. And so each of these playlists provide digital library resources, like Jessica mentioned, that can supplement the curriculum and other classroom activities based on each student's performance level. And so the teacher isn't really looking to replace her curriculum or define an instructional sequence because these resources aren't designed to do that. Then with this information, she can focus on where all of her students are performing, which is scoring near standard. And so just as you saw in the previous presentation, for each performance level under the left-hand column, students are working to solidify the following skills. The teacher can see the skills that students who performed at this level have not quite mastered. And so the information in the playlist can help teachers strengthen and differentiate the learning goals and success criteria expected of each student. In the column on the right, educator recommended next steps in digital library resources, the teacher can find specific activities and lessons in the digital library that help meet the needs of the students performing at this level. She considers this and thinks about developing a final unit activity that can address some of the concerns that were brought up for her in the analysis she conducted in step 3. And so as I noted before, when the teacher uses resources from the digital library, the formative assessment attributes are already built in. And so you can see what a great resource this is. It's aligned to the standards. It connects the performance level of students with recommended activities and resources in the digital library. And she can use those resources to tailor instruction based on the needs of her students. The playlist can also help teachers who are looking to challenge students who may already have a good grasp on this content. And this is really going to help her to keep all of her students engaged and continuously learning. And so I noted how formative assessment can inform a teacher's own professional planning and evaluation goals. The formative assessment attributes inform that continuous feedback loop between curriculum instruction and assessment to help teachers act on evidence and determine next steps. And so you can see, you've seen all of these movements, right? The teacher is reviewing existing information, data from her student performance, including the previous year's summative assessment data. During planning, she's supplemented her curriculum, lesson planning, and goal setting using resources like the Connections playlist. She's engaged in high-quality teaching using the formative assessment attributes. She's done progress tracking and reflecting using data sources such as the interim assessment block. And then she's done some continuing planning and teaching, adjusting instruction using targeted use of digital library resources. And so perhaps at the end of this unit, the teacher decides to administer an IAB in a standardized manner as a benchmark assessment. This is another great piece of evidence of student learning. And so you can see how this cycle can continue throughout this unit, throughout the year, and hopefully this scenario has given you some ideas that could be used to help support teachers, help support instruction throughout the year. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica with some additional thoughts on using the Smarter Balance components.
All right, so if you were listening to that sample scenario and thinking to yourself different ways in which you might want to make adjustments to that approach based on what you know about your students or your teachers, that's great. That's exactly the sort of thinking that we want to generate. Remember, this is just one example, and the exploration of the various options within the system is strongly encouraged to identify which options are best going to meet the needs of your students and your teachers. We absolutely recognize that there are a bunch of different approaches that can be taken locally. In this sample scenario, the teacher was just working with one interim assessment block, but there's nothing to keep a teacher from selecting multiple IABs to choose from and incorporate into classroom instruction. In the sample scenario, the teacher didn't do any hand scoring, but maybe for teachers who have a good amount of experience using the interim assessments, they want to start exploring the hand scoring portion of the interim assessments and engage in that local hand scoring. What makes Smarter Balance so strong is not only that the materials are teacher developed and everything's aligned with the Common Core, but Smarter Balance recognizes and it really respects the professional judgment of teachers, of educators, to identify which options are going to best meet the needs of their students. And it provides that flexibility to decide how best to use those options. For example, the interim assessments, they can be used in either a standardized manner and as more of a summative assessment, an assessment of learning, or if the teacher chooses, in a non-standardized manner, more of a formative assessment practice within classroom instruction. And there's that flexibility for the educator to make that decision. Now, whether you're an individual teacher who's looking at these options and trying to determine which one or which ones to use, or you're a school or district administrator trying to make that decision for your teachers, there are certain strategies that are just going to support successful implementation of all of the components. And it really starts with that initial training. So a really solid overview of the Smarter Balance system, a clear distinction between assessment of learning and assessment for learning. And you heard earlier in the day about some of the in-person trainings that CDE offers, the Institute, the summer workshops, which can all be key components of that initial training. We mentioned it earlier, start small. Just focus on one or two options for starters. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe if you're brand new to exploring the interim assessments, you select an interim assessment that doesn't require any local hand scoring. Provide your teachers with dedicated time to explore and plan and collaborate with colleagues. And provide that flexibility to make individual decisions about how to best use those resources to meet the needs of students and teachers. And then, of course, the ongoing support, providing continued dedicated time for staff to collaborate. And I should mention, just as a reminder, you've heard it throughout the day, there are a lot of good resources on the CDE website. So that ongoing support could be as simple as providing links to some of these great resources that are available through the CDE website to provide that support. Now, we know that hearing about a sample scenario can help generate some thinking about which sort of components you might want to start exploring next. But hearing from a colleague in a neighboring district can really help start visualizing what successful implementation looks like. So over the summer, Smarter Balance visited a number of school districts across Smarter Balance member states and filmed short videos featuring the district's implementation of one or more components of the Smarter Balance system. And 2 California school districts were selected for that video series. There's Kerman Unified, which is up in Fresno County, and then Val Verde Unified, which is just down the road in Riverside County. So today we're going to show you Val Verde's video and a little bit about Val Verde Unified. They're a district of about 20,000 students and about 800 teachers. They serve about 80% of their students come from low-income households, and about 20% of their students are English learners. So let's take a moment to look at Val Verde's experience implementing the Smarter Balance system.
In Val Verde Unified School District, we're a diverse community of scholars, and our students can do incredible things. Our goal is to support our students in ways that they need support, and so I couldn't be more thrilled with the system that we've got in place here in Val Verde, and really using the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium resources as a partner for us. We've got the instructional coach that's there to support and work with teams of teachers, and then beyond that we have a pretty tight system with interim assessment blocks and the reporting features that have been so powerful, and it gives teachers kind of a systematic way to analyze what's happening with groups of students and individual students in their classrooms.
Once our teachers were able to see the information that they could gather from our IABs, they were sold, they were hooked, because not only could they expose our kids to the rigor that they were going to experience on the summative assessment, but now they could have conversations with their colleagues about what was working in some classrooms and what was not, the strengths and weaknesses of our scholars, first best instruction. So the fact that we have these tools readily available is phenomenal. We're seeing great gains on our achievement levels in both ELA and math. In addition, we're seeing the confidence boosts among our scholars.
I do feel the scholars are more connected to their learning based on their performances of the IABs, because they can actually see how they're doing, and they really want to find out how they can be better. One particular standout group at our site has definitely been our third grade team. They have increased their student population of meets and exceeds by 26% in ELA compared to last year, and have also increased their meets and exceeds population by close to 20%.
At first, it did seem like it would be overwhelming to give the IABs, but honestly, once you do it the first time, it isn't hard, and the students pick up on it so quickly. I felt that it was able to give them that confidence that they were able to see the data and see where they grew or see where they're struggling, and then to help them with improvements.
A piece of advice I would give a coach or a teacher is just get started. Just get in there and administer one and kind of go from there and get yourself familiar with how it works, how the system works. Talk to other people about how they're using it, collaborate with your team, looking at the different item types and that type of thing. So I think once they get started, it gets the ball rolling. Once the ball's rolling, there's a lot of different possibilities with what you can do with the IABs. We're trying to build independent, driven scholars that are ready to take on anything. And so if we can start building that confidence and that ownership early, just imagine where they're going to go when they get to middle school, high school, and beyond.
So you can see that the approach used in Valverde, the implementation of the Smarter Balance system, really is a partnership between the teachers, the coaches, the principals, even the superintendent. And I love that they featured their grade 3 team. It's not unusual for us to receive questions about how Smarter Balance resources can be used to support grade 3 students. It's the first year they're taking the Smarter Balanced assessments, and a lot of resources available both in the interims and the digital library for grade 3 students. So I want to thank Valverde for participating in that video series. If you're looking for more inspiration, the other videos within this series, again, they span multiple member states and they cover various components of the system. Really great series available on the Smarter Balanced website, and it's called Smarter Balanced in the Classroom. So in closing, I want to remind you that the CDE Assessment Division remains available to assist you in helping to identify and provide guidance on those options that are available from within the Smarter Balance system. And in addition to CDE, we have regional assessment liaisons throughout the state, primarily at county offices of education, that are available to also provide support. And you can identify your region's assessment liaison by visiting the CDE website and searching for the Regional Assessment Network. Each region has at least one RAN member available, and would strongly encourage you to reach out to them as a support as well. So again, Joy and I'd like to thank you for your time. And now please join me in welcoming our next presenter.